I had kale producing abundantly, so I decided to use it in a metaphorical culinary journey. Today I am inviting you onto a journey. It's a journey that started a few weeks ago when I planted something in my yard. Now it's time to harvest it. But it will take us to a place we have not been yet. In the past, I've shared how kale, or more precisely collard greens, has figured in my diet ever since I was a child growing up in Brazil. But this time I wanted to explore another dish that is famous in this region. I had a few clues to describe this place. Part of the beauty of humanity is to explore the diverse cultures around the globe. It is through the way we live, speak, tell stories, sing, and even eat that we express who we are as individuals and as groups. The best thing of our modern, interconnected world is that we get to experiment and borrow what we like from each other's cultures. This place became synonymous with navigation. It was in the age of exploration that this nation thrived. It was one of the linchpin actors that shaped the world as we know it today. This tiny nation was able to circumnavigate the world in search of riches, and they've put in their maps nations that some didn't even know existed. Such was their skill that they could sail the 7 seas using nothing more than the power of the wind, some mathematics, and the guidance of lights in the sky, such as stars and the sun. Not all that discovery was peaceful. They had conquistadors to claim for their own nation the new lands discovered and massacre the natives. Much has been written about their stories, although many times only in their perspective. And since history is written by the victors, we still know little of the true human impact this had to native peoples, and the little we do know paints a grim picture. When it comes to arts and culture, this nation is rich with the influence of many peoples it came in contact with. It's known for its blue and white ceramics, especially the tiles. They have their own name, azulejo, which comes from the word azul, or blue. Of course, I'm talking about Portugal. Portugal has a centuries-old tradition. Its culture is a mixture of peoples. It's the Arab influence that controlled the peninsula for several centuries, borrowing things like even azulejos, the word azulejo coming from the Arabic. It's also the influence in tastes and forms. It's a mixture also borrowing from some of the native cultures and African cultures from the peoples they've conquered. Portugal has a rich tradition, and I want to test out one thing, one dish that is well known outside of Portugal as a Portuguese dish, and that's Caldo Verde, or as the Portuguese would say, Caldo Verde, which is nothing more than a rich green soup. I have some kale growing from a few weeks that I've sown, and it's looking beautiful. And there's gonna be nothing better than to cook up a delicious caldo verde with this kale. I was not going to stick to a faithful and traditional version of caldo verde. Like most of the food I cook, I would use the traditional base as a starting point and arrange it according to my taste. Before I head outside to harvest the kale, which is after all the star of the dish, I want to prepare a stock. The stock will give the dish, the soup, a richer, deeper flavor profile. And I have here another star to the dish, which is this beautiful fresh maitake mushroom. I plan to use all of the edges as a garnish to top the soup, but the central part, which can be a little bit tougher, I'll put it in the stock. That way all that beautiful flavor will infuse and it won't just go to waste. Traditionally, the Portuguese use linguiça or chouriço, which is the Portuguese sausage. I was making a modern, lighter, and healthier version, while still trying to infuse complex flavor into the dish. In a pan, I poured several cups of water and dropped in it the tougher inner part of the maitake mushroom, cut into large chunks. I reserved the florets for later. This would impart umami flavor to the dish. Cutting the pieces smaller helps you develop a stock quicker.
E os argonautas chegam, vêm de Cabral, vão extrair o ouro, couro também. Queriam mesmo as Índias os têm. Tempero.
Next to go into the boiling water was half of an onion I had chopped.
Ordem e progresso, 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 ordem e progresso.
A few cloves of garlic smashed and roughly cut would expand the flavor profile. Unlike in traditional English cookery, the Portuguese always loved their garlic, and I'm glad they did. I lowered the heat on the simmering stock and added 2 cut-up carrots to the pan. I added some salt and went outside to get another key ingredient common in Portuguese cookery, a fresh bay leaf. I'll be back right after this commercial. With the stock simmering away, I went to my kitchen garden to harvest kale. The key ingredient of Caldo Verde is collard greens, although the red Russian kale I was about to harvest would serve the same role. I was happy that this protected raised bed with detachable chicken wire side panels was keeping my kale safe from groundhogs and other herbivores like deer, with a penchant for dark leafy greens. Since this was in the beginning of the growing season, the kale leaves were still on the small side. I had sown the kale thickly to first harvest baby greens, but soon I would thin out the plants, allowing only a few to grow into more robust specimens with the typical larger leaves. Using young tender kale leaves is preferable anyways because of their superior texture and taste. I also harvested a handful of fresh parsley. While that may not be a traditional seasoning for the dish, I felt it would marry well with the other flavors.
Seu fado desfiar, lutas sobrevirão, lance sementes ao chão.
I washed the kale and let it crisp up submerged underwater. My stock was ready for straining, so I got a chinoise sieve and strained the stock. I don't mind a bit of fiber in my soups, so I tried to extract as much flavor, pressing the veggies against the sieve walls.
If tomorrow won't come and the future's undone, your dreams become foregone.
I reserved the strained stock and went about preparing the next main ingredient, potatoes. I cut them into cubes to hasten cooking, and also added to the pan the other half of the onions finely chopped.
Weave then yourself a song. Some pain endures.
I drizzled some olive oils into the pan and sweated the onions.
But fate is written slow. When seeds of hope are sown.
I then dropped the potatoes and immediately deglazed all the browning from the onions with the stock.
Keep calm and carry on, singing this fate is my new song, sliding the scales of right and wrong, dancing.
I put the bay leaf back into the cooking liquid and let the potatoes fully cook. Then came the other crucial step to the dish, finely slicing the kale. I compressed the leaves with my hand and went about slowly slicing the log of leaves. I didn't have a very sharp knife at hand, so I couldn't get it as finely as is traditionally required, but I don't mind a more rustic soup. Once the potatoes cook up, you need to cream them. I didn't have a blender in my new kitchen, so I used a potato masher to break it up. Obviously, this is not ideal for this recipe since it asks for a creamy base. I don't mind a more chunky soup, but you might want to use, ideally, an immersion blender if you want your soup to be creamy. Lastly, I dropped the sliced kale and mixed it around, adjusting salt to taste. I removed the spent bay leaf and turned the heat off so the kale would not overcook. To garnish the soup, I crushed 3 cloves of garlic and roughly chopped them. I poured about a tablespoon of olive oil into the pan and added the garlic to slightly fry it. I made sure that the maitake mushroom fringes were separated into smaller chunks, ready to be stir-fried. My last key ingredient would give an explosion of flavor to the dish, despite not being a traditional part of the recipe, despite being common in Portugal. I got some pickled caper berries and some oiled cured olives and sliced them up, adding them to the frying garlic before it browned. Then I dropped in the maitake mushroom and stir-fried everything. To add an herbal finish, I roughly chopped the parsley I had picked up and added it last, turning off the heat. I was ready to plate my Caldo Verde, topping it with garnish and then enjoy. It is a very nourishing and tasty recipe. You will want to try it at home.
Você está feliz?